Imagine waking up at 3:17 in the morning for no clear reason. Not because of a nightmare, not because of a sound loud enough to shake the walls, but because the room suddenly feels wrong. The fan above your bed has stopped spinning. The air is thick now, damp, heavy, like an old wooden attic sealed shut for decades. You can smell dust, wet timber, and something faintly metallic hiding underneath it all. Then you hear it. A slow creaking sound above your head. Not random, rhythmic, like rope tightening against old wood. Creak, creak, creak. You freeze. Your eyes adjust to the darkness inch by inch while your heartbeat starts punching against your ribs hard enough to make your chest hurt. The more you listen, the more your body realizes something your brain is still trying to deny. That sound is swinging, and whatever is causing it is directly above you. Naturally, you do what every modern human does when faced with unimaginable horror. You grab your phone. Because apparently humanity decided glowing rectangles are emotional support artifacts now. The screen lights up your room for half a second. No signal, no internet. Just your own reflection staring back at you from the black screen. Pale, tired, hollow-eyed. Then the creaking stops. Silence floods the room. So suddenly your ears begin ringing. And that's when you feel it. A pressure around your neck. Gentle at first, almost affectionate, like invisible fingers measuring your throat. You look up. Nothing. Unfortunately, according to Vietnamese folklore, that's usually how it starts. Because in certain parts of Vietnam, people still whisper about a presence called the hanging ghost. The hanging ghost. Not a spirit that chases you through hallways. Not a monster hiding under your bed. This thing is worse. It waits. It lingers inside exhaustion, grief, isolation, and those long nights where your thoughts start sounding less like your own voice and more like something quietly speaking through you. And the truly disturbing part, most victims never realize they're being hunted. They think they're simply tired, burned out, done with life, which is exactly what makes this entity so terrifyingly effective. Because a predator doesn't need claws when it can convince the prey to stop running on its own. Welcome back. Tonight we're diving into one of the most psychologically disturbing entities in Vietnamese spiritual folklore. A phenomenon tied to rope, unfinished deaths, haunted spaces, and the terrifying idea that certain thoughts inside your head may not belong to you at all. So dim the lights, put your headphones on. And if you start hearing creaking sounds above your ceiling tonight, I'd recommend not looking up too quickly. Some things survive longer when they remain unseen. In Vietnamese folk belief, some spirits don't simply leave. They remain. Not because they enjoy the scenery, obviously. A rotting beam, a riverbank, and an abandoned room with mold in the corners are not exactly five-star afterlife accommodations. They remain because something went wrong at the moment of departure. That is where the hanging ghost begins. The name itself carries the image of a loop, a circle, a tightening ring, a repeated ending that refuses to become final. In many rural traditions, a death involving rope, rafters, old trees, or isolated structures is considered spiritually unstable. The soul is believed to be suspended between worlds, unable to rise, unable to descend, unable to return to ordinary human memory as anything peaceful. It becomes a presence, a pressure, a thought that keeps repeating until it no longer feels like a thought. Old Vietnamese houses were built with wooden beams overhead, dark corners under the roof, and quiet spaces where air barely moved. At night, these houses made sounds. Timber cracked, bamboo shifted, wind dragged itself across tiles. Most of the time that was normal, most of the time. But when a family began hearing the same creak every night, at the same hour, from the same beam, people paid attention. Because folklore understands something modern people keep pretending not to know. A place can remember. A room where someone surrendered to despair does not always become empty afterward. Sometimes the silence thickens. Sometimes the air grows colder near the ceiling. Sometimes visitors feel a strange heaviness around the throat and decide, very wisely, to sleep somewhere else. That isn't cowardice. That's pattern recognition. And frankly, congratulations to them. Very rare skill these days. The rope, in this belief system, is not just an object. It is a boundary, a connection, a line pulled tight between the living body and whatever waits beyond it. Across East Asian traditions, cords and knots often represent spiritual binding, red threads of fate, protective strings, ritual knots, sacred ropes marking forbidden spaces. A rope can protect, a rope can seal, a rope can bind something in place, or, in the wrong story, bind it to you. This is why the hanging ghost does not behave like an ordinary ghost. It is not only the spirit of one tragic person. It is the pattern left behind by a certain kind of ending, one shaped by isolation, silence, and a final decision made when the mind was no longer a safe place to live in. That makes it more dangerous than a simple haunting. A ghost in the hallway is at least honest. Rude, yes, but honest. The hanging ghost does something subtler. It turns despair into architecture. It makes the ceiling feel lower. It makes the night feel longer. It makes the rope in the corner of the storage room seem meaningful in a way it absolutely should not. And according to some versions of the belief, the entity does not create the darkness inside a person. No, it listens for it, then it pulls. The terrifying thing about the hanging ghost is that most victims never realize the hunt has already started, because the entity does not appear first. The symptoms do. It usually begins with exhaustion. Not dramatic exhaustion either. Nothing cinematic. No thunderstorm outside your window. No demonic screaming echoing through the hallway. Just the slow collapse modern people call being tired. You stop sleeping properly. Your thoughts become repetitive. Food loses taste. Conversations feel distant, like everyone around you is speaking through several walls underwater. Then the silence begins changing shape. You notice certain sounds at night becoming unnaturally clear. The hum of your refrigerator, water dripping somewhere inside the building, electrical buzzing behind the walls, and eventually, the creaking, always above you. Creak, creak, creak. At first, you rationalize it. Old apartment, cheap ceiling, wind pressure, which is fair. Humanity has survived this long almost entirely through denial and caffeine. But then the pattern starts tightening. The sound only appears when you're alone, only after midnight, only on nights when your thoughts become particularly dark. That's when Vietnamese folklore says the entity has noticed you. Not because you're weak, because you're isolated. And isolation is where this thing feeds best. In older rural stories, people believed the hanging ghost could call a person. Victims reported hearing someone whispering their name outside the house, footsteps near the riverbank at night, or the voice of a loved one asking them to come outside. The important detail, the voice never sounded threatening. That would be too easy. No, the voice sounded comforting, gentle, familiar, like the final excuse your exhausted mind was desperately hoping to hear. This is why many elders warned against answering voices immediately after waking up at night. According to folklore, the moment you respond, you acknowledge the presence. You establish contact. It's like accepting a friend request from something wearing your own sadness as a disguise. Excellent cybersecurity decision. The entity's next stage is psychological synchronization. That's when victims begin repeating behaviors without realizing it. Waking at the same hour every night, standing in the same corner of the room without remembering why, staring at ceiling beams too long, feeling drawn toward bridges, rivers, rooftops, abandoned buildings. And the entire time, the victim genuinely believes these impulses belong to them. That's the horror, not possession, suggestion. A normal ghost attacks the body. The hanging ghost edits the narrative inside your head until self-destruction begins sounding reasonable, which, unfortunately, makes this entity horrifyingly compatible with modern life. Because today's world mass produces emotional exhaustion at industrial levels. You doom scroll until sunrise. You compare your life to strangers online. You work until your body feels borrowed. You isolate yourself because replying to messages suddenly feels exhausting. And somewhere, during those endless quiet nights, your own thoughts stop sounding entirely human anymore. Ancient spirits once haunted forests. Now they probably prefer studio apartments with poor ventilation and unlimited Wi-Fi. At this stage of the folklore, strange environmental phenomena often begin appearing around the victim. Ropes appearing in dreams, shadows hanging motionless in peripheral vision, unexplained pressure around the neck, audio distortions during phone calls, and recurring nightmares involving ceilings, beams, or dark water. Some stories even claim recordings capture sounds the victim never heard in real time. A swinging rope, soft breathing, wood straining under invisible weight, like the room itself is rehearsing something. And according to several Vietnamese accounts, victims approaching the final stage often repeat the same sentence, "I just want everything to be quiet." Then one morning arrives, and the room finally is. A haunting does not always begin with a ghost. Sometimes it begins with a room. A narrow room, low ceiling, yellow wall stains spreading like old bruises. A single window that never seems to let in enough air. You move in because the rent is cheap, which, in horror, is basically signing a contract with the underworld while pretending you got a good deal. At first, nothing happens. Then the room develops habits. Every night at 3:17, the air turns damp and cold. The wooden ceiling makes a soft pulling sound. Your pillow smells faintly of dust, old rain, and something sour underneath the fabric. You tell yourself it's the building. Old places complain. But this place does more than complain. It repeats. The same creak, the same hour, the same pressure around your throat when you wake. Vietnamese folklore often treats certain locations as spiritual containers. A place that has witnessed enough despair may begin to hold it, the way old cloth holds smoke. The walls absorb the final emotion. The beam remembers the weight. The floor remembers the silence afterward. And when someone new enters that space, they don't just live there, they synchronize with it. That is one of the most disturbing ideas behind the hanging ghost. The entity may not follow you like a monster. It may already be built into the architecture. The room becomes the loop. You begin waking at the same time as the person before you. You avoid the same corner without knowing why. You feel nervous under the same ceiling beam. You dream of a rope you have never seen, hanging in a house you somehow recognize. The haunting becomes routine. And routine is dangerous because humans trust repetition. We call it normal. We call it stress. We call it needing a better sleep schedule. Bold of us. In some accounts, haunted locations connected to this entity include abandoned homes, old banyan trees, empty storage rooms, riverbanks, and cheap rented rooms where previous suffering was quietly erased by fresh paint and a new lock. Because apparently, landlords in every culture share one sacred ritual: paint over the problem and raise the deposit. But folklore insists the stain remains, not always visible. Sometimes it appears as sound, a scrape above the ceiling, a dragging across wood, a breath too close behind you when you look in the mirror. Sometimes it appears as thought, a sudden urge to stay inside, a strange comfort in darkness, a feeling that leaving the room would be more exhausting than remaining trapped in it. That's how the space wins. Not by locking the door, by making the outside world feel unbearable. The longer you stay, the more your daily life tightens around the same pattern. You stop opening curtains. You stop answering messages. You stop noticing how often your eyes drift upward. The room has trained you. And by the time you finally realize that every night sounds exactly like the one before, the loop may already be complete. So here is the question the archivist must leave on record. If your room started remembering someone else's final despair, would you recognize it as a haunting, or would you simply call it your own bad mood? So how do you survive the hanging ghost? First, understand the insultingly unfair part. You do not defeat it by being brave. Bravery is useful against things with teeth, claws, or poor upper body coordination. This entity is not that generous. It does not challenge your strength. It studies your collapse. So the first rule is simple. Do not let isolation become a room you live inside. In Vietnamese folk logic, the living must remain close to the living. Voices, meals, sunlight, conversation, even ordinary noise, these things matter. They anchor you. They remind the mind that it still belongs to the human world, not to the damp ceiling, not to the creaking beam, not to the whisper that keeps saying rest would be easier. If you begin waking at the same hour every night, leave the room, turn on lights, speak to someone, wash your face with cold water, eat something warm, break the pattern before the pattern begins breaking you. Second rule, do not answer voices in the dark. If you hear your name called from outside a closed door, from a hallway, from a riverbank, or from a place where no one should be standing, wait. Do not reply immediately. Do not follow. And absolutely do not convince yourself that investigating alone is a healthy character-building exercise. That is not courage. That is auditioning for folklore. The third rule, avoid places that feel emotionally wrong. Not ugly, not old, wrong. A room can be old and harmless. A tree can be ancient and peaceful. But if the air feels too heavy, if your neck tightens for no reason, if every sound seems to come from above you, if your thoughts darken the moment you step inside, leave. Your rational mind may call it superstition. Your nervous system may call it survival. Listen to the one that has been keeping mammals alive longer. Fourth rule, sleep. Yes, tragically boring, deeply uncinematic, horrifyingly practical. But exhaustion is one of the entity's cleanest entry points. Lack of sleep weakens the border between thought and intrusion. It makes shadows persuasive. It turns ordinary sadness into a hallway with no exit sign. And the hanging ghost loves a hallway. Finally, do not trust every thought just because it appears inside your head. Some thoughts are weather, some are wounds, some are echoes. And in this folklore, some are invitations wearing your voice. If a thought feels sudden, repetitive, cruel, and strangely external, do not obey it. Name it, interrupt it, tell someone, step into light, touch something cold. Return to the physical world before the loop tightens. Because the hanging ghost does not need your belief. It needs your silence. Now, survival chance. If you notice the signs early, the insomnia, the repeated creaking, the strange pull toward dark places, and you reconnect with people quickly, survival chance, 55%. Not heroic, not guaranteed, but respectable. Like bringing a flashlight into a haunted basement and also having the common sense to not enter the basement. Revolutionary behavior. If you have started hearing the calling, your name whispered at night, familiar voices from impossible places, the soft suggestion to come closer. Survival chance, 25%. At that stage, the entity has already established a rhythm. It knows which memories hurt. It knows which hour you are weakest. It has learned the shape of your loneliness. If you are fully isolated, sleep-deprived, avoiding daylight, and beginning to believe the room understands you better than people do, survival chance, 8%. By then, the entity may not need to pull anymore. You may already be walking, and that is the final cruelty of the hanging ghost. It may not be a monster standing in the corner. It may be a spiritual name for the moment despair becomes intelligent. A folklore mask placed over the oldest human danger. The mind turning against itself in a room too quiet for rescue. Unfortunately, that explanation may actually be worse. Because if the ghost is real, you can leave the room. But if the ghost learned to sound like you, then the haunting travels very light. So tonight, when the lights are off and your ceiling settles above you, listen carefully. If you hear wood creak once, ignore it. Old houses breathe. If you hear it twice, sit up. If you hear it 3 times, creak, 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 do not look up too quickly. Some loops only close when they know they have your attention. And some ghosts do not descend from the ceiling. They wait for you to rise toward them. Subscribe for more forbidden archives from the darker corners of folklore, or don't. The thing above your bed probably isn't leaving either way.